Let's make Hello everyone, this is Frank DeMore with the End Times Research Ministry. Today is November the 17th of 2017. Here at the End Times Research Ministry, what we do is we'll give you the prophecies and then we'll connect those prophecies with the events that are taking place, the current events, so that we get a better understanding as we see the prophecies unfolding right before us. Now today, what I like to do is, first of all, I'd like to invite you to go over to my website. You'll see the cover of my book, and that book will be at my website. You can download the book today for free. The Last Chronicles of Planet Earth is a documentary that it does exactly what I'm doing here at my YouTube channel. And that is give you the proof and the documentation that we are definitely living in the times just before the return of the Lord Jesus Christ. But first of all, I want to draw my attention to Psalm 83, because there's a debate whether Psalm 83 really is a prophecy about the future events, or that was just a prayer that went out and it wasn't a prophecy. But what we need to know is, if it is a prophecy, we would be able to see what is going on concerning each and every one of these nations that are in Psalm 83, and whether it's lining up today in the current events that would show us that in fact it is a prophecy that has not yet been fulfilled. Now, one of the things that I want to show you today is we're going to deal with the Ishmaelites, because they are named in that Psalm 83. And the Ishmaelites, well, who are they? They're today's Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia recently has been in the news. And I'll show you the significance of the Saudis in the news when it comes to the writing in Psalm 83. But before I go to the current news about the Saudis, let me bring you to Ezekiel chapter 38. Because Ezekiel chapter 38, they do mention the Saudis. Let me show you. And here we are, Ezekiel chapter 38, the verses 12 through 13. Ezekiel chapter 38 is talking about a future attack on Israel. And it gives the exact nations who will be attacking Israel. But it also gives the people who are going to make a formal protest against the attackers. And one of the nations in Ezekiel chapter 38 that we see that given this formal protest that have joined forces, what we know today as the United States, Australia, and Canada. And I'll show you why. Take a look at what it says. To take a spoil and to take a prey, to turn thy hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited. And what this is telling you is that Israel, which was uninhabited at one time because the Jews were taken out of the land, and now during the time of the end, they're coming back and they're going to inhabit the land again. We know from current events, 1948, Israel was born as a nation. That was current back then. So Israel has been established and they're back in the land inhabiting it. It goes on, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, which the Jews came out of the many nations when they were scattered all over the place, so that too has been fulfilled, which have gotten cattle and goods that dwell in the midst of the land. And Israel is loaded with cattle and goods since they came into the land in 1948. Now it gives the names. Sheba and Dedan. Sheba and Dedan in the Old Testament, that was their names. But now currently we know them as Saudi Arabia. And it goes, and the merchants of Tarshish. Now Tarshish in the Old Testament was Great Britain. With all the young lions thereof shall say unto thee. Now the young lions, first of all, if you do a search on Tarshish, you'll know that they are, in fact, Great Britain, and the insignia for Great Britain is a lion. So the young lions that we believe that this scripture is talking about are the break-off nations that used to be under the rule of Tarshish, or Great Britain, which would be Canada, the United States, and Australia, the young lions. Now it goes on to say, the formal protest. Art thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, and to take a great spoil? So this massive army that is coming down, predominantly Muslim nations, coming down on the nation of Israel, and Saudi Arabia, along with those young lions in Great Britain, making a formal protest. And I believe that they're making this protest because they really can't do much about it, because this is going to be a massive army like Israel has never seen before, attacking them. And the only way that Israel could ever survive such a massive assault against this tiny nation the size of New Jersey would be for God's hand to step in and to take care of the enemies. And when you read 38 and 39 of Ezekiel, you'll see that's exactly what takes place. But for now, Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia, apparently, they're on the side of Israel. Why is this important? Well, when we're dealing with the Psalm 83 war, if it is a war, we would have to take in consideration the moves that are taking place currently that will help us see what is going on and if this prophecy will be fulfilled or not. Now, for those of you who have never read Ezekiel chapter 38 in the Old Testament, these are the nations, you'll see the arrows in red, that will be coming down against Israel. And as I said, predominantly Muslim, Islamic nations. Now, the difference between the Ezekiel war and the Psalm 83 war, if it is in fact a war against Israel in the future, is that what you're looking at here in Ezekiel 38, the nations are not exactly bordered nations against Israel. Whereas in Psalm 83, you'll see that all of these nations border the nation of Israel. Let's take a look at this headline that came out today from Al Jazeera. And it was on the 17th of November, 2017. Report, Saudi Crown Prince will crush Hezbollah with Israel. Now keep in mind, Hezbollah is named in that psalm. That's Psalm 83. So if it is a prophecy and Hezbollah is involved in the attack with the rest of those nations that are mentioned in the psalm, why is Saudi Arabia, who is also mentioned in that same psalm, why are they now aligned with Israel in the current events to destroy a nation or a people that are supposed to be attacking with Saudi Arabia in that Psalm 83? That's a very good question. Now, considering the fact that we know from Ezekiel 38, which I just showed you, that the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia is given a formal protest, so they're in an agreement or an alignment with Israel. They're not seen as enemies of Israel during that war. So is it possible that the prayer of Asaph was just, in fact, that's what it was, and it wasn't a prophecy? Well, current events, I believe that we're going to see firsthand which one it is by the current events. What happens in Saudi Arabia? Now, events can change. We've seen over the years how events change abruptly. And who knows, maybe Saudi Arabia will join forces with the other nations that are mentioned in the psalm. But for now, it certainly is a problem that we're seeing the footsteps of the Saudis joining forces with Israel. Let's go on to the article. The king of Saudi Arabia plans to step down and announce his son as his successor next week. The British newspaper Daily Mail reported on Thursday, citing a source close to the country's royal family. The move is seen as the final step in 32-year-old Prince Hamad bin Salman's power grab, which began earlier this month with the arrest of more than 400 princes and government ministers in a corruption probe. I'm going to pick the article up at this paragraph here. The high-level source further said that once crowned king, the prince will shift his focus to Iran, Saudi Arabia's longtime regional rival. Now get this, he will also enlist the help of Israel military to crush Hezbollah, Iran's proxy in Lebanon, according to the source. Now Lebanon is also mentioned in that Psalm 83. MBS is convinced that he has to hit Iran and Hezbollah. MBS's plan is to start the fire in Lebanon, but he is hoping to count on the Israeli military backing. He has already promised Israel billions of dollars in direct financial aid if they agree, claim the source. MBS cannot confront Hezbollah in Lebanon without Israel. Plan B is to fight Hezbollah in Syria, added the source. And of course, Syria is another one of those nations that are also mentioned in the writing Psalm 83. So for now, what we need to do is to keep our eyes on the news and see what transpires, because if Saudi Arabia does join together with Israel and they do go after Israeli enemies, like it would be the Saudis' enemies as well, then we would have a better focus in understanding that the Psalm 83 was in fact a prayer of Asaph, but it was not a prophecy. I really don't know at this point because of the circumstances going on right now in current events. But what we do know is Israel and the Saudi Arabians have had these secret meetings, so it shows us that maybe something in the background is brewing. Now, first of all, you have to understand that there's been a conflict between the Sunnis and the Shiites. Saudi Arabia is predominantly a Sunni nation, Sunni Muslims, whereas Iran, Saudi Arabia's enemy, is Shiite. They definitely don't like each other. So Saudi Arabia is concerned that Iran will try to overtake the nation of Saudi Arabia and therefore an alliance with Israel. Let's make no question about it. Saudi Arabia for years has been worried about the advances of the Iranians. And we can see this from the June 4th, 2015 article that came out from Bloomberg. Israelis and Saudis reveal secret talks to thwart Iran. Now, jumping to 2 years later, we get more information from NBC. This article came out 2 days ago, November the 15th, 2017. The headline, "An Open Secret. Saudi Arabia and Israel get cozy." In the Middle East, your enemy's enemy is your friend. For Israel, Saudi Arabia's growing willingness to confront Iranian influence in the Middle East presents an opening for an awkward alliance. As the kingdom's dynamic new crown prince, Hamad bin Salman, tries to rally an anti-Iran coalition, Israel, with the blessing of the Trump administration, is presenting itself as a willing and able partner. So it's very interesting what we see here. We see the United States, we're seeing Israel, and the Saudi Arabians, who are mentioned in the Ezekiel 38 prophecy, which is indication that what we see in reading in Ezekiel 38 is definitely taking shape. The footprints of that prophecy, no doubt, are right before us. The appetite for cooperation between two of America's closest allies in the Middle East has grown in recent years as their security interests have dovetailed. Both Israel and Saudi Arabia view Iran's growing influence in the region as an existential threat and want to squash militant Islamic groups like ISIS and Iran's main proxy, Hezbollah. The U.S. official who witnessed the Saudi and the Israeli official hold a closed-door meeting together recently said such informational meetings have been taking place for at least 5 years. Now, those of you who want to continue on with this article, just take that headline and Google it. It'll come up. But the article talks about the Saudi prince being young and inexperienced, and actually things could backfire on him. Now, that would be very interesting, because if Saudi Arabia were trying to make an alliance with Israel and it did backfire, then that backfire possibly could be the result of a Psalm 83 war, making it not just a prayer of Asaph, but a prophecy of Asaph about the coming years when Israel would be attacked by the neighboring borders. So a possible scenario in the coming months, coming years, would be that what if the Saudi Arabians wanted to get involved with the Israelis, to join together to fight against the Iranians? But what happens if this coalition backfires? What the new Saudi prince wants to do falls apart, and either his own people will come against him or the Iranians and overtake the Saudis. Well, if that was the case, then the Saudis would be under control of another people, and then it would make more sense that Saudi Arabia would be involved in that Psalm 83 writing that we see in the Old Testament. Now, in this same article, there's a video which discusses this backfire. Listen to this. I'll play a portion of it.
It's a big mistake for the president to be praising what is an internal power grab that potentially could destabilize one of the most heretofore stable countries in the Middle East.
Trump and the Saudis sharing a mutual enemy, Iran. The Saudis today accusing Iran of helping launch a missile from Yemen toward Saudi Arabia, calling it an act of war. Tonight ordering Saudi citizens out of Lebanon, which is virtually controlled by Iran, as surging oil prices tell the story of global fears of another Gulf War. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, Washington.
Let's face it. We're living in a society where events change very rapidly. Alliances change very quickly. But I do know this. Since the Lord warned us to keep on the watch, I believe without a question there was a major purpose for him saying this. That as we watch the current events, understanding the writings from the prophecies, that during these last days we would have knowledge, more knowledge, because we're being able to see these events take place as soon as they happen, unlike so many of the previous generations who were unable to do that. So my advice to you is the same thing that I am doing. I'm keeping on the watch, watching especially the events in the Middle East, and especially those nations that are mentioned in prophecy, because I believe without a question that in the near future we're going to find out if the prayer of Asaph was a prophecy or just the prayer. But as it stands right now, it certainly looks like it is a future prophecy. Now, I'm not going to cover it here, but the current events show us that in the prophecy, the current events really show us that the same things that were written in the Psalm 83, for example, like the same nations coming against Israel, saying that they want to destroy the nation of Israel so her name is not mentioned anymore. The nations that are listed in that Psalm 83 are saying the identical things to Israel right now, except, as you can see right here from the current events, from Saudi Arabia, who's trying to make an alliance. But I believe that these prophecies are tied together because one prophecy may lead to the other one. And since we're seeing the signs of Ezekiel chapter 38 with that scripture that I had given to you earlier in this video, where we see the United States, Australia, Canada, Sheba and Dedan, which is modern day Saudi Arabia, giving that protest for that war. So the alliances are coming together now, and I believe that they're going to be formed just like the Bible shows us, and that war will take place. Now, when will all these things take place? It's very easy to understand. All you have to do is look at Matthew chapter 24 and read verses 32 through 34. This is the word of Jesus Christ talking about the last days. Listen to what the Lord, the Messiah, says. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. Of course, the parable of the fig tree is about Israel, the nation of Israel. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. What the Lord was saying is when Israel was established again as a nation, as you already saw, May 14th, 1948, and as young nation growing, or as the scriptures say, putting forth its leaves, we know that it's very close. Verse 33, so likewise ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the door. So he's telling us, when you see all of the things that he already showed us, that he already showed to us in the full context of Matthew chapter 24, which are all the signs taking place all at the same time, that is when it was going to happen. But then he nails it, if you will, in verse 34, and tells you exactly who it is that he's talking about. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. So in other words, the people, the generation who saw Israel being born, are going to be alive to see the return of Jesus Christ. It's that simple. There wasn't any other generation that is able to fulfill this prophecy except the generation who saw the rebirth of Israel. My father's generation could not see this prophecy take place because Israel wasn't born then, but it is now in the generation that you're alive. And that tells us that before everybody passes away in the nation of Israel, the rebirth of the nation of Israel, before that happens, Jesus Christ will physically step on this planet again and begin his 1,000-year rule in Jerusalem. And that's why we're seeing the increase of the birth pangs which Jesus alluded to in Mark chapter 13. So let's be diligent and follow the words and the advice of the Lord, keeping on the watch so that we understand what's happening as it takes place. We won't be void of knowledge in how it's going to end because we'll have already known by reading these prophecies in the Lord's book, the Bible. This is Frank DeMore with the End Times Research Ministry.